My name is Alzira Benedita Oliver. I am 74 years old, and anyone who sees me at the town square in New Mexico, selling sugared fritters with my stubborn white hair tied in a bun, might think my life has been nothing but sweetness. But last night, the phone rang 47 times, from a private number. When I finally picked up, I heard my son's voice, the same raspy tone I haven't heard since his funeral 5 years ago. He whispered, "Don't trust her." That warning sliced through my chest like a wet knife. If you're listening, please do me a favor. Click like on this video and subscribe to the channel. That small gesture helps me keep sharing stories that too often remain hidden. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I live simply now. Every dawn I mix flour, sugar, and cinnamon, and I sell fritters at the square, surrounded by neighbors' greetings, the smell of coffee drifting from cafes, and the tolling bells from the nearby church. Children smile when I sprinkle powdered sugar, and my laugh seems easy to them. But inside, I carry a river of memories I've kept dammed for decades. For years, I guarded my silence like one guards burning embers under ashes. I thought silence protected me, but I realize now it only imprisoned me. Speaking out, even now, is the only way to defend myself and those I love. If I keep quiet, monsters will continue finding shelter in the dark. I speak softly, the same way I speak to my grandchildren when the sky warns of storm. My words are close, low, asking you to believe me, because silence was my shield for too long, but it also became my cell. And today, I want to open that door. Sometimes I think life turned me into stone, but the truth is, I'm still the little girl who learned too soon to breathe without making noise. The wrinkles on my skin may have hidden some scars, but the memories never stop bleeding beneath them. I'm not asking for pity. What I seek is testimony, proof that what wounds us in childhood doesn't vanish in old age. It disguises itself, it hides, but it follows us while we raise children, cook meals, laugh in public, and in the silence of the night, when a ghost's voice calls through the phone, all the old wounds reopen. I want you to hear me as if we were sitting across from each other, a hot cup of coffee between us. What I'm about to share isn't easy, but it sustains me. The certainty that by telling it, I set free the frightened child still living inside me. And maybe, just maybe, I can help another little girl avoid learning the language of fear. I remember my childhood in a small town in rural Texas, where wooden houses leaned against endless fields of wheat and sunflowers. Our home was modest, with floorboards that creaked whenever the wind blew. The windows let in both the chill of winter and the fragrance of my mother's geraniums planted in old cans. The packed dirt floor carried the marks of our bare feet, and every corner seemed filled with echoes of laughter. Even in poverty, I felt we lived in a world complete, built from smells, songs, and tiny daily miracles. Mornings smelled of roasted barley coffee that Mama brewed in the kitchen. The steam arose slowly, clinging to the beams of the ceiling. I would sit on a low stool, watching her hands move with grace, sewing, kneading, caressing. Daddy left early with his tool bag slung over his shoulder, walking down the dusty road toward the construction sites of the next town. His figure grew smaller as he went, but the sense of his presence stayed like an anchor in our home. We had little, but ingenuity made up for it. Day-old bread turned into French toast dusted with sugar. Hand-me-down clothes became dresses for smaller children, and our toys were stones painted with faces or dolls made from rags. What I remember most was the laughter. Teresa's, my little sister, who giggled like a runaway bell, and Johnny's, still a toddler then, babbling nonsense that filled the air with joy. Afternoons were alive with sound and color. Roosters crowed, dogs barked from backyards, and the wind rustled through mesquite and oak trees. We played barefoot in the yard, inventing kingdoms with sticks and dried leaves. Sometimes Mama leaned out the window and called me in to help her with sewing. I learned early how to thread a needle, fold fabric, and understand that her work kept food on our table. Sundays were sacred. Even without money, Daddy took us to the small church. The sound of the bells echoed in my chest like a solemn song. Afterward, we walked home and shared what felt like a feast. A pot of beans with vegetables, sometimes flavored with a bit of pork if we were lucky. We sat together, breaking bread and stories, laughter seasoning everything. Life moved at a slow rhythm, marked by the rooster's crow and the clatter of pots. Nobody rushed, nobody worried about clocks. What mattered was surviving, yes, but also celebrating the smallest victories. A chicken laying, eggs Mama being paid for sowing, rain finally arriving after a dry spell. Each detail was cause for gratitude. I always felt an invisible duty to protect my siblings. From the time I was little, I stood in front of them during games, spreading my arms like wings. When Teresa cried from fear of the dark, I lay beside her and invented tales of princesses who flew away. With Johnny, frail and clumsy, I made sure he ate first, stayed warm, and didn't stumble. That was my first identity, the guardian. The school was a couple of miles away, and we walked the dirt road with other children from nearby homes. Dust clung to our sandals and hair. In class, I lost myself in letters and numbers, daydreaming of worlds far beyond the wheat fields. Sometimes I felt the world was too big for me, but when I came home to see Teresa's smile and Johnny's eager arms, I knew exactly where I belonged. The town's fairs were the brightest moments of the year. Lanterns were strung across the square. Women sold fritters and spiced cider, and men brought guitars and fiddles to fill the air with music. I spun Teresa in dizzy circles, while Johnny clapped along, his cheeks flushed with laughter. For a few hours, poverty vanished, replaced by a joy that belonged to everyone. Summers in Texas were scorching. At night we slept with windows open, and the smell of dry fields mingled with the song of crickets. Mama told stories by candlelight, and I stared at her hands that never stopped moving, even as she spoke. Those nights felt eternal, as if nothing bad could ever reach us. Winters were harsher. The wind sliced through cracks in the walls, and the fireplace often failed to warm us fully. But we huddled together, 3 children under one blanket, laughing at our shivers. I learned then that closeness could make any hardship bearable. Daddy was a man of silences. He didn't speak much, but when he did, every word carried weight. I remember him teaching me to hammer nails into a broken bench. "If you hold it steady, nothing will wobble," he said. I believed him, and for years I clung to that phrase as if it were scripture. Mama was voice and song. She hummed while sewing, while sweeping, even when her eyes filled with quiet sorrow. Her melodies were old folk songs she'd learned from her mother. I memorized them in secret, repeating them later when I needed to feel close to her. The whole town felt like one extended family. Neighbors loaned flour, salt, or sugar. When someone fell sick, another brought broth or home remedies. That solidarity shaped my childhood, teaching me to trust the kindness of others. I couldn't yet imagine that some hands, wrapped in kindness, could hide claws. Rainy afternoons were my favorites. The sound of drops drumming on the tin roof mingled with the smell of wet earth. I sat by the window with Teresa in my arms, spinning tales of mermaids dancing in puddles. Her laughter mixed with the roll of distant thunder, and for a while the world was a giant refuge. Over the years, I memorized every corner of the house. The loose board that squeaked, the latch that never shut right, the hiding place where Mama kept coins for emergencies. It was a small universe, but to us, it felt infinite. That was the soil where our roots grew strong. If I close my eyes now, I still see the yard bathed in golden afternoon light, chickens darting about, smoke curling from the stove, and voices braided together in harmony. It was a poor life, yes, but rich in love. That love was my armor, though I didn't yet know how much I'd need it. We never imagined that peace could shatter. None of us saw the storm coming, the illness that would steal Mama, or the stranger who would step into her absence. We were too innocent, too trusting to know that the brightest days can hide the darkest nights ahead. The change arrived disguised as silence. Mama grew tired too easily and no longer sang while she sewed. Her hands, once steady, trembled with every stitch. At first, I thought it was only exhaustion, the kind that a rest could fix, but soon the fever came. It clung to her like a shadow, and with each passing day, she seemed to fade. Our home, once full of warmth, began to feel heavy, as if even the walls could sense something slipping away. Daddy tried to keep things steady, but grief was already pressing at his chest. He left earlier, came home later, and avoided our eyes. One afternoon, I found him in the kitchen, sitting with his head buried in his hands, whispering a broken prayer. That was the first time I understood that fathers could feel lost too. Days stretched endlessly. Mama stayed in bed, her breath shallow and weak. I tried to take her place, cooking, cleaning, keeping Teresa and Johnny fed and quiet. The work didn't bother me as much as the fear of watching her vanish. Each cough, each silence, was another stitch unraveling the fabric of our home. Neighbors noticed. Some women brought herbal teas, others pots of soup, but nothing eased her suffering. No doctor ever gave us a clear answer. It was a sickness without a name, a slow undoing that stole her strength little by little. Her once bright eyes dulled into a faraway gaze, and I felt helpless. One night, when her fever burned like fire, she called me close. "Take care of your brother and sister as if they were your wings," she whispered. Her hand was ice cold. I nodded, though my throat was a knot of grief. That promise branded itself into me, deeper than any scar. The morning she passed, the Texas sun blazed as if mocking our grief. Teresa's sobs shook the air like broken glass, and Johnny crawled under the table, refusing to come out. I didn't cry. My tears froze inside me, turning into stone. I knew the world had changed forever, and somehow I had to keep standing. Daddy was swallowed by despair. He stopped speaking for days, barely eating, barely moving. He wandered through the house like a shadow, his sorrow so thick it seemed to choke the air. At only 12, I felt the weight of becoming the anchor, though my arms were still too small for such a burden. And then came Elias, a man from the next town, always dressed neatly, always with a gentle voice. He arrived saying he only wanted to help, bringing groceries, fixing leaks, keeping Daddy company in his grief. Folks praised him, calling him a blessing. At first I believed them. His presence was welcomed with gratitude. He carried water buckets, offered rides in his truck when it rained, and brought warm bread to our door. He seemed to fill the emptiness Mama had left, stepping naturally into the space she once held. No one questioned his place in our home, but what looked like salvation was really the beginning of our downfall. Mama's absence had left our house defenseless, and Elias slipped into that void with ease. We didn't know then that the man who smiled in public would turn our lives into a private nightmare. At first, Elias seemed like a savior. He arrived with a bag of warm bread, greeted everyone kindly, and smiled as though the world were lighter because of him. To the neighbors, he was the very definition of generosity, a man stepping in to support a grieving family. Even I, still a child aching for safety, felt some relief in the way he fixed what Daddy no longer could. But small cracks soon appeared in his kindness. It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. If I forgot to salt the beans, he would make a mocking remark in front of everyone. If dust lingered in a corner after I swept, he chuckled, but his eyes bore into me like sharp blades. I shrank under his gaze, ashamed of mistakes that barely existed. To the community, though, he remained flawless. At church, he knelt with devotion, offering rides to elderly neighbors, passing out candies to children. Everyone praised him, calling Daddy lucky to have such a friend. Nobody imagined that once the door shut, his tone darkened, his presence turned heavy. The first touches came disguised as discipline, a harsh grip on my arm when I didn't move quickly enough. a shove when I hesitated. A girl needs discipline, he'd say, with a smile meant for Daddy, who only nodded, too lost in sorrow to intervene. I learned to hide the pain, to bite my tongue. Soon, Elias monitored everything. He knew what time I woke, how long it took me to prepare supper, how much bread remained in the pantry. A clean house shows a decent girl, he'd remark. I was only 12, yet I felt like every breath, every movement was under his inspection. Daddy, blinded by grief, saw nothing. Elias filled the emptiness with authority, his voice louder than ours, his will stronger. Teresa and Johnny obeyed him in silence, their small shoulders hunched. I tried to shield them, but I was already losing ground. In public, Elias placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture others saw as paternal, but his hand lingered too long, pressing down until my chest tightened. I froze, trapped between the need to pull away and the fear of drawing attention. Neighbors smiled, believing they saw tenderness. Nights became unbearable. The sound of the wooden boards creaking no longer meant just footsteps. It was a warning. I memorized each rhythm. Daddy's heavy steps, Teresa's light ones, Johnny's clumsy ones, and Elias's slow and deliberate. When they paused outside my door, I lay still, pretending sleep, praying he would pass by. Alone, his words cut sharper than any blow. You're ungrateful. I feed you. I protect you, and still you frown. Or, without me, your family would starve. His voice slithered into my head until guilt replaced my fear. He was shaping me into silence. Punishments came often. Spilled milk, a broken plate, excuses found daily. Sometimes it was words. Sometimes a grip that left marks hidden beneath sleeves, never visible enough for others to question, but deep enough to bruise me inside. I lived on constant alert. I read every flicker of his eyes, every shift in his breath, memorizing signs of his moods. My life turned into a battlefield where survival meant anticipating his next move. Home, once my haven, had become a maze of dangers. The silence hurt almost as much as the fear. Who would believe me? To the town, Elias was a saint. I was only a girl, awkward and quiet since Mama died. If I spoke, I knew I'd be dismissed, perhaps even punished further. So I swallowed it all, stone after stone. Teresa began noticing. She asked why I avoided being alone with him. Why? I pulled her away when he stared too long. I brushed her off, inventing excuses, but her worried eyes told me she felt the chill too. I vowed she would never face what I did. Johnny sensed it differently. Too small to understand, he clung to my skirt whenever Elias raised his voice. He cried easily, his little body trembling, and I wrapped him in my arms like a shield. Protecting him became both my duty and my desperation. As months passed, Elias spoke of me more boldly. At gatherings, he'd say, I was blossoming into a fine young woman. Neighbors laughed, seeing only innocent flattery. But I heard the poison beneath, the claim he was staking. It made my skin crawl. One summer afternoon, he asked me to join him in the garden, pretending to teach me how to pick tomatoes. His hand brushed mine again and again. Sweat ran down my spine, cold despite the heat. In that moment, I knew the danger wasn't just in my imagination. His threats grew sharper when I resisted. Your daddy couldn't handle another tragedy. Or, do you want Teresa to suffer because of your attitude? The words pierced deeper than his touch, chaining me tighter than any lock. My silence became the ransom for their safety. Survival turned into choreography. I created excuses to avoid him, rehearsed silent movements, mapped secret exits in case of the worst. Each day was an act of strategy. Every breath weighed against the risk of provoking him. The fear was constant, but the waiting was worse. The sound of his truck in the yard, the creak of the door, each moment stretched into terror. My chest tightened, my body braced, long before he even entered the room. To outsiders, I was only a withdrawn girl, a little quieter since Mama's death. Nobody saw that my silence was armor, that behind my lowered eyes lived a scream I dared not release. Elias thrived in that disguise, feeding on control. He hadn't yet crossed the final line, but I knew it was only a matter of time. His shadow was growing, and ours, as a family, was shrinking into nothing. I, once a girl who ran freely through wheat fields, was now a prisoner in my own home, studied and cornered by a man the world praised as righteous. That was how the darkest chapter of my childhood began, with a monster who lived not under the bed, but in our living room. Silence became my strongest shield. Not just the absence of words, but a silence stitched together with fear, with the certainty that if I spoke, no one would believe me. At church, Elias still knelt in the front pew. In the square, he shook hands and blessed children. At home, his shadow dominated every corner. I learned to swallow words, bury tears in my pillow, and pretend everything was fine. Each morning, I woke before dawn, lighting the stove and boiling water. I fried tortillas, poured milk for my siblings, and swept the floor before the sun even rose. Those routines gave me something to control in a world that no longer belonged to me. It was my way of holding the house together, of protecting what little normalcy remained. Nights were the hardest. I lay awake, listening for the creak of floorboards. Each sound became a signal. Daddy's heavy steps, Teresa's quick ones, Johnny's clumsy ones, and Elias's, measured, deliberate, terrifying. When his shadow paused at my door, I held my breath, stiff as stone, praying he would pass. I began to wear oversized clothes, even in the blistering Texas heat. Loose sleeves hid bruises, and the extra fabric shielded me from his eyes. Teresa asked why I didn't like dresses anymore. I smiled and said I was cold, though sweat dripped down my back. Excuses became my second language. If he told me to help him in the garden, I'd say Teresa needed my help with homework. If he called me into the kitchen, I feigned a headache. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Each excuse was a small battle won. My body betrayed me with fear. I woke drenched in sweat. My stomach knotted so tightly I couldn't eat. Headaches split my temples, and exhaustion clung to me. Fear lived inside me like a tenant who refused to leave. Nobody asked questions, or maybe they didn't want to know the answers. Johnny, still too young, sensed the danger in his own way. He clung to me like a shadow, hiding behind my skirt when Elias entered. His little hands trembled against me, and I held him tighter, pretending I was strong enough to keep him safe. Teresa, though, was beginning to notice more. She studied my face when I lowered my eyes, when I avoided being alone with him. Sometimes she whispered, "Did he say something to you?" I shook my head, refusing to let her glimpse the horror. She was my reason to endure, but also my greatest fear, that he would one day turn to her. Daddy remained trapped in grief. He sat by the window for hours, staring at nothing. His silence was another wall I couldn't climb. While mine was survival, his was surrender. I longed to scream at him, to beg him to save us, but my voice never rose above my fear. I created secret refuges. In the attic, hidden among old boxes, I carved out a space to cry into a cloth, biting it so no one would hear. That attic became my confessional, my only place to release the weight pressing on me. School offered a fragile reprieve. Letters and numbers pulled me into other worlds. But as the final bell rang, dread returned. Walking home, I felt a noose tighten around my neck with each step closer to the house. Neighbors adored Elias. They praised his generosity, his strength, his kindness. Their admiration was his strongest weapon. No one suspected the cruelty hidden beneath his charm. I watched him play his role so perfectly that I almost doubted myself. Almost. I measured every word, every step. A laugh too loud might provoke him. Silence too long might offend him. I became a strategist, reading his mood like a soldier reading a battlefield. It was exhausting, but necessary. Some nights, I thought the fear would kill me, but then I saw Teresa asleep. Johnny curled beside her, and I remembered Mama's last words. Take care of your siblings as if they were your wings. That promise was my lifeline. I planted small defenses everywhere, keys hidden in corners, a window latch loosened for quick escape. I rehearsed opening doors without sound. These plans weren't freedom, but they gave me the illusion of choice. Occasionally, he had good moods. On those days, the air felt lighter, but I never trusted it. Calm was only disguise, a pause before the next storm. Waiting was often worse than enduring. My body changed with adolescence, and that terrified me more than anything. At 13, my figure began to shift, and I saw his gaze linger longer, heavier. I clenched my fists, wishing I could shrink, wishing I could still be the small child who might escape notice. I avoided mirrors. My reflection no longer belonged to me. My eyes looked older, burdened. Fear was etched into my face, and I couldn't bear to see it staring back. Some days, silence became unbearable. I wanted to shout, to tell someone, but I pictured the disbelief, the scolding, Elias's retaliation. The thought of Teresa or Johnny suffering for my words kept me quiet. The house itself turned against me. Corners that once held laughter now hid dread. The kitchen smelled of fear. The hallway carried his shadow. I tiptoed as if I were a guest in my own home. Still, light broke through in small ways. Teresa's giggle, Johnny's sloppy hug, the smell of fresh bread, Mama, once baked, now only in memory. These little sparks reminded me life wasn't all terror. Dreams of Mama visited me often. In them she held me, whispering that it would pass. I woke crying, reaching for arms that weren't there. Those dreams were bittersweet, both comfort and torment. Days dragged like heavy chains, each one a repeat of the last. Fear, silence, survival. Yet somewhere deep inside me, a tiny seed of resistance began to grow. That seed was fed by my love for my siblings, by Mama's words, by the unbearable thought of surrender. It whispered that one day, somehow, I would find a way out, and so I carried on, hiding bruises, inventing excuses, swallowing fear. My childhood was gone, replaced by survival. Silence both shielded me and trapped me, a cage I had built to endure. But inside that cage, a quiet strength was forming. I didn't yet know it, but the silence that imprisoned me would also sharpen me, preparing me for the moment I'd finally break free. Over time, something inside me began to stir. It wasn't courage yet, but instinct, the kind of instinct that whispers not yet, not forever. I started watching Elias carefully, studying the way he moved, the rhythm of his breathing, the twitch of his jaw. I learned to sense danger before it arrived. That vigilance became my first weapon. One afternoon at school, the new teacher, Mrs. Moore, looked at me differently, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with real concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low and steady. No one had asked me that since Mama died. I said yes quickly, but inside, her question lit a spark I thought had gone out. Mrs. Moore gave me small refuges. She let me stay behind after class, offered me a cookie or a glass of milk, talked to me about books and faraway places. They were brief moments, but they reminded me that kindness was real, that not every adult meant harm. I also began building secret defenses. I hid a pocket knife in the attic, not to use, but to know I had something. I practiced opening windows without making a sound. I mapped the fastest routes to the road. These weren't escapes yet, but rehearsals that gave me a fragile sense of control. My love for my siblings was my fire. When I caught Elias watching Teresa too closely, a storm of fury rose in me. I distracted him, shielded her, pulled her into chores. Every time I put myself between them, I felt the weight of Mama's promise heavy on my shoulders. For Johnny, my stories became a fortress. Invented tales of dragons defeated by small, clever children. He would laugh, eyes wide, believing me. And as I told them, I began to believe a little too. Perhaps even the weakest could win. In the plaza, I overheard women whisper about their own hidden sufferings. Husbands who hit, children who vanished. I pretended not to listen, but their words carved into me. I realized I wasn't alone, that silence was a chain binding many. My body still shook when Elias came near, but my mind was shifting. I began noticing his routines, memorizing when he left, when he returned, when his mood soured. Each observation was like gathering stones for a future wall. Teresa sensed more than I admitted. She hugged me sometimes and whispered, "You're like Mama." I held her close, swallowing tears. Her trust reminded me that I couldn't collapse. I had to stand, no matter how heavy the fear. One day a neighbor noticed my pale face and dark circles. "Are you sick, child?" she asked. For a heartbeat, I nearly confessed everything, but fear clamped my mouth shut. Still, that moment proved something. Someone might believe me someday. Silence was no longer just a prison. It was strategy. I chose when to stay quiet, when to let slip a look or hesitation that might plant seeds of doubt in others. Dangerous, yes, but empowering too. Then Mrs. Moore pressed a slip of paper into my hand. On it, a phone number scribbled in pencil. "Your Mama's cousin lives near Houston," she said softly. "Keep this safe, just in case." I folded it, hiding it in my shoe, and carried it like a secret lifeline. Fear still ruled my days, but within its cracks, roots of resistance grew. No one else could see them, but I could feel them, steady and stubborn. Deep down, I knew one day the silence would end, and when it did, it wouldn't be just my survival. It would be my siblings' salvation, too. The night everything broke is carved into me like a scar. It was midsummer, the air heavy and suffocating. Daddy had fallen asleep drunk in his chair. Teresa and Johnny were in bed, and I sat reading by candlelight when I heard the slow, deliberate steps in the hallway. The shadow stretched across my wall, and I knew it was him. He entered without knocking, closing the door behind him with a click that froze my blood. His smile was crooked, wrong. "You're not a little girl anymore," he said, his voice low, oily. My heart thundered so loudly I thought it would wake the house. In that moment, I understood silence was no longer protection. It was betrayal. He moved closer, and I backed against the wall, trapped. His hand reached, but before he could touch me, something ancient and fierce rose inside. I thought of Mama's last words, of Teresa's laugh, of Johnny's small hands, and then I screamed. I screamed with every ounce of voice I had buried all those years. The scream woke Teresa. She burst into the room, eyes wide, clutching her nightgown. Seeing her there, so fragile, so close to the same fate, gave me strength. I shoved Elias hard, surprising him enough to break free, and bolted for the door with Teresa behind me. His roar followed us, his boots pounding after. But I wasn't the same frightened child anymore. I ran to the kitchen, yanked the keys I had hidden days earlier, and unlocked the back door. Outside, the sky split with thunder, rain pouring down in sheets. The storm had come, and it felt like it came for me. I grabbed Teresa's hand and rushed to Johnny's room. I shook him awake, slipped his shoes on without caring they were mismatched. "Don't look back," I whispered. "Just run." With his tiny hand in mine, we raced into the night. Behind us, Elias shouted, furious. But the storm drowned his rage. Rain pounded on the tin roof, lightning lit the fields, and mud swallowed our tracks. For the first time, I felt the world was on our side. We reached the road, soaked to the bone, trembling. The night bus to Houston was waiting. The driver, hesitant but merciful. He let us on, no questions asked. As the bus rumbled forward, I dared to glance back. Our town grew smaller and smaller until it vanished into the storm. Teresa leaned against me, shivering, her lips whispering prayers. Johnny collapsed in my lap, asleep despite the chaos. I stared out the window, my chest heaving, realizing Elias could no longer touch us. Fear still clawed inside, but freedom had begun. At the station, I searched my shoe for the scrap of paper. The hue. Pencil marks were faint but still legible. With trembling hands, I found the payphone, dialed, and waited. A woman's voice answered. Aunt Lydia, Mama's cousin. My voice cracked, but she recognized the family in me, and within an hour she arrived. When she opened her arms, tears spilled down her face. She pulled us close, wet clothes and all, murmuring, "You're safe now, you're safe." She didn't ask details that night. She just wrapped us in blankets, fed us warm bread, and let us sleep. I lay, awake, though, staring at the ceiling. Fear still haunted me, but something else filled my chest. The knowledge that I had kept my promise. My siblings were safe, and Elias's grip had broken. That night I learned that fear can silence you for years, but love can break walls in an instant. My childhood was over, but survival had given way to freedom. And freedom, however fragile, was enough. If this part of my story moved you, please click like so more people might find strength through it. The years that followed weren't easy. Aunt Lydia took us in with open arms, but life in Houston was harsh. At 13, I became more mother than sister, working wherever I could, scrubbing floors, washing laundry, babysitting. Every dollar I earned went toward food or books for Teresa and Johnny. Childhood was gone, but survival was enough. Elias still haunted my dreams. I woke some nights gasping, convinced his shadow stood by my bed. But when I looked and saw my siblings sleeping safely, nearby, I remembered. He could never reach us again. That truth was my anchor. Even when fear tried to pull me under, Teresa grew into a calm, steady woman, carrying Mama's grace in her every gesture. Johnny blossomed too, his laughter returning like a song we thought lost. Watching them thrive told me the sacrifice was worth it. My body carried the scars, but their joy became my healing. Life offered sweetness too. I built my own family, raising children with love and fairness. I swore my home would never know shadows like the one I escaped. I taught my children that love does not wound, that trust is sacred. Every meal, every bedtime story was both for them and for the broken girl still inside me. The day I buried my son Michael, my eldest, grief tore me open again. But his daughter, Clara, looked up at me with his same eyes, and I knew I had to keep going. She became my reason, my heartbeat, proof that even after loss, love remains. So when the phone rang years later, 47 times, and I heard Michael's voice warning me, "Don't trust her," I understood. The instinct I had honed as a child was calling again. This time, it wasn't for me. It was for Clara. Silence had once saved me, but now silence would only endanger her. I tell this story because silence is the soil where monsters grow. But a voice, even a trembling one, can light a room. If my words reach someone tonight, may they reach deep enough to remind you, you are not alone, and fear does not have the final word. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Your support gives me strength to keep telling the stories that once went unheard. And tell me in the comments, what did you feel as you listened? Your voice might be the comfort someone else has been waiting for.